On a Thursday afternoon, just this March, a couple months ago, I walk into the auditorium at Cardozo Senior High School in Northwest DC. And my first thought is, it is beautiful in here. They did a fabulous job with this renovation. And the stage in the auditorium, I mean, you could host a Broadway production on this stage. And I'm walking down the aisle, and I pass row after row of brand new seats, and I finally sit down. Now, I'm at Cardozo this evening because the mayor is having a public hearing on the school budget for next year. And I work for Teaching for Change, and we have a parent organizing project. And so for 4 years now, I've been working with Orr Elementary, a school in Southeast DC. And I'm here to bring the message from parents and teachers and from the community that Orr's building needs to be modernized because it's been pushed off for 8 years in a row. And I can tell you, Orr is a special place. When you walk into Orr on any given morning, the first thing you're gonna see is Mr. Ray out front, the dean of students, and he's gonna be shaking hands and waving to people and dapping students up. And you walk into Orr and the parent center is there on your left-hand side as soon as you come in, and it's gonna be buzzing. People are in there checking emails, and they're applying for jobs and figuring out what volunteers are needed. And it could be Monday Moms or Friday Fathers or Wellness Wednesday or Roving Readers. There's always something going on at Orr, and parents are so involved at Orr that the students don't separate them from the teachers. Orr is a special place. But the building is another story. And so I'm here to bring the message from parents in the Orr community that their building needs to be modernized now and money needs to be put back into the budget. So it's important that I'm here, but honestly, I'm thinking to myself, I want to go home. It is a weekday. I worked a long day. I have a 4-month-old at home. This thing was supposed to start at 5:30. It's 6 o'clock, and the mayor's not even here yet. And I knew he was gonna be late. You know, he's a politician. I knew he was gonna be late, and I'm just thinking to myself, I should just go home. But it's important that I'm here, but that's not why I stay. I stay because of Malik. You see, 8 years ago, I was a first-year teacher at an under-resourced public charter school, and I will never forget the day when Malik, one of my 8th grade students, came bounding down the hallway with the rest of his classmates from lunch, with that awkwardness that 8th graders have, being stuck between being a child and not quite an adult. And as Malik gets to my door and I'm there to greet all of my students, his eyes open wide, just like the rest of his classmates, because he sees there's a new seating chart. And let me tell you, a new seating chart is a big deal in middle school. But it's especially a big deal in my class because you see, in Malik's class, I had 35 students, but I only had 28 desks. And so, as a first-year teacher, just trying to do the best that I could, I put students like Malik in the back at the computer table because I knew that they would do whatever it took, no matter where they were in the room, to learn. And my students who needed the most help, I put them up at the front. And sometimes the girls would ask if they could squeeze in with their best friends, so they'd sit 2 of them in a desk, and I let them. And so Malik comes, and he walks in up, and he says, "Oh, Miss Criner, you see, because he had a little bit of a list. It was cute. She says, "Oh, Miss Criner, do I have a desk today?" "No, Malik, I'm sorry, you're still at the computer table. But if one of your classmates doesn't show up, you can have a desk." And I watched as his face fell, his shoulders fell. He didn't complain. He walked into the room, understandingly, walks up to the front of the board, writes down what's on the board, and goes and takes a seat in the very back at the computer table. That was one of many moments as a teacher that never sat right with me. And so that evening at Cardozo, I stayed in my seat. And finally they call my name, so I walk up and I sit down at the table, and I've got all my papers, and I'm ready to testify, and I'm just burning inside. Like, I know exactly what I'm gonna say, and they are not ready. They have no idea what's about to hit them. So I'm sitting at the table, and I take the microphone, and I pull it directly in front of my face, because I wanna make sure they can hear what I'm saying, right? So I'm sitting here, and I get right into my testimony as the timer starts. And I start by asking them, why won't you modernize Orr Elementary? This has been pushed off for 8 years in a row. And this is an open classroom floor plan school. And I turned to the audience and I said, for those of you who don't know what that means there are no walls that separate the classrooms and hallways. So what happens is the students' voices and sometimes their bodies carry throughout the corridors and they distract other people. And let me tell you, if you've ever seen 3 first-grade classrooms lined up side by side by side, separated only by rolling whiteboards and bookcases, you would know that this doesn't work. And I started laying it into it. I'm telling them about the building. I say, imagine being an Orr father and you get a call that in the first weeks of your daughter being in preschool, 3 years old, the school can't find her because she's wandered off from her classroom and it's been an hour. And finally they find her. She was behind the stage of the cafetornasium. That's the cafeteria, the auditorium, and the gymnasium. For those of you who aren't sure, it's all the same. It's all the same room. And I start telling them about the mother who tells us that her daughter has asthma, but the ventilation in the building is so poor and the heating and the cooling systems, sometimes they don't work right. They can never quite get the temperature right. And so when it gets really hot, her daughter's asthma flares up. And the best that this mother is able to work out with the school is that on days when it's really hot, her daughter has to leave her classroom on the 3rd floor, come down to the business manager's office in the 1st floor, and sit there, do her work just so she can breathe. And I tell them about parents who go and read in the classrooms, and they say it takes them 20 minutes to read a book that should only take 5. So I'm laying it in them, and I set it up to bring it home, and I look at it and I say, you won't modernize the building, and on top of that, you're cutting the school's budget. Are you setting Orr Elementary up to fail so that the next time there are school closures, that school is on the list due to no fault of the students, parents, or teachers working tirelessly in that building every single day? And then I dropped the mic. I didn't actually drop the mic. I really wanted to. It was on the table, but I look and I can see that their faces, the faces are just stunned and mouths are open and like they can't believe what I just said, and it's all truth. So the rest, I think the woman after me testified something about wanting more for a parking lot. So I go home, then I go home later that evening. So in the next week, parents found more ways to advocate for Orr, including meetings with the mayor's office and going to other hearings. And about 2 weeks after I stayed in my seat that night at Cardozo, the mayor released his budget. And so I was looking at it, I made a phone call to Mrs. Thomas in the Parent Center, and I said, hey, Mrs. Thomas, I said, okay, they released the mayor's budget. I said, and I'm looking down, and I see Orr Elementary, and I said, I'm looking for that $14 million that we were promised. And I said, now we're not done yet, but they've doubled the amount for the project. And so Mrs. Thomas says, I'm gonna have to call you right back because I have to go tell everybody. So she gets off the phone and she takes off through the building. Now, this is not the end of the story for Orr Elementary. Orr has been in the budget before. 8 years in a row, the modernization has been pushed back. So the fight isn't over, but the parents and the community determined that this will be the time that this modernization happens because that community deserves better. Those children deserve better. Malik deserved better. And so this was a real-life civics lesson for Malik from Ms. Criner with love. And very quickly, Mr. Ray is here tonight, Mrs. Thomas is here tonight, Mr. Fitzmyer is here tonight. So the Orr Elementary, please give them a round of applause. My story would not be possible without the teachers and staff and the parents of Orr. Thank you.
During Lent, I was always taught that the most meaningful thing one could do was to give something up. Sacrifice something you typically indulge in to prove to God you understand his sanctity. I've given up soda, McDonald's, French fries, French kisses, and everything in between. But one year, I gave up speaking. Figured the most valuable thing I could sacrifice was my own voice, but it was like I hadn't realized that I had given that up a long time ago. I have spent so much of my life telling people the things they wanted to hear instead of the things they needed to. Told myself I wasn't meant to be anyone's conscience because I still had to figure out being my own, so sometimes I just wouldn't say anything, appeasing ignorance with my silence, unaware that validation doesn't need words to endorse its existence. When Christian was beat up for being gay, I put my hands in my pocket and walked with my head down as if I didn't even notice. Couldn't use my locker for weeks because the bolt on the lock reminded me of the one I had put on my lips when the homeless man on the corner looked at me with eyes up, merely searching for an affirmation that he was worth seeing. I was more concerned with touching the screen of my Apple than actually feeding him one. When the woman at the fundraising gala said, "I'm so proud of you. It must be so hard teaching those poor, unintelligent kids," I bit my lip because apparently we needed her money more than my students needed their dignity. We spend so much time listening to the things people are saying that we rarely pay attention to the things they don't. Silence is the residue of fear. It is feeling your flaws, gut-wrench guillotine your tongue. It is the air retreating from your chest because it doesn't feel safe in your lungs. Silence is Rwandan genocide. Silence is Katrina. It is what you hear when there aren't enough body bags left. It is the sound after the noose is already tied. It is charring. It is chains. It is privilege. It is pain. There is no time to pick your battles when your battles have already picked you. I will not let silence wrap itself around my indecision. I will tell Christian that he is a lion, a sanctuary of bravery and brilliance. I will ask that homeless man what his name is and how his day was, because sometimes all people want to be is human. I will tell that woman that my students can talk about transcendentalism like their last name was Thoreau, and just because you watch an episode of The Wire doesn't mean you know shit about my kids. So this year, instead of giving something up, I will live every day as if there were a microphone tucked under my tongue, a stage on the underside of my inhibition. Because who has to have a soapbox when all you've ever needed is your voice?